Alright, hello and welcome to Legacy Land Conservancy's training video for photo monitoring volunteers. My name is Clint McGill, I'm Legacy's Easement Stewardship Coordinator, and I will be narrating this video. So first, I just want to give a brief overview of what we're going to talk about in this video. So first, just going to give like a 1,000-foot view of what land trusts are, how we protect land, and why it's important for us to monitor them, as well as how we do that. And then I will go over the landscape mobile application that we use to monitor the land and how to navigate that and use that when you're out in the field. Okay, so first I just want to talk a little bit about a couple of the different tools that we use to protect land at Legacy. So most relevant for the purposes of this video is going to be the tool of conservation easements, and I will talk in a lot more detail about those here shortly. The other method that Legacy uses to protect land is our system of nature preserves, which include both rural and more urban lands, and as a result those include a really wide variety of different ecosystems, and those are all managed by Legacy and open for public use for recreational purposes. And if you want to learn more about those, please just visit our website for more details. Okay, so what is a conservation easement? Conservation easements are essentially just legal agreements that are reached between a landowner and a land trust like Legacy. And the goals of an easement can vary quite a bit from property to property, but typically they serve to protect a set of what are called conservation values. And those can include things like water quality, important wildlife habitat. In more rural areas, the views themselves, so the natural undeveloped views are protected. And Legacy also holds a lot of easements that protect the agricultural lands in the area, so the prime, most productive soils, farms that have been in families for more than 100 years, and things like that. So how do easements actually achieve these goals and protect these conservation values? It does that by restricting how the property is used by current landowners as well as future landowners. So when that property changes hands, the protections that are put in place by the conservation easement are there forever. So there are a handful of things that are really crucial to protecting the conservation values for any given property. And these first three things are stuff that Legacy does internally, but are just helpful for you to understand as a photo monitoring volunteer to see how everything fits into the bigger puzzle of land protection. So first and foremost, we need a conservation easement with clear terms. That helps us on Legacy staff to enforce the restrictions and address any violations that may come up, but it also helps the landowners themselves to understand the terms of their easements and ensure that they are using their property appropriately. Legacy also has to commit to enforcing the easements that we hold, and while it's pretty rare, it does at times mean seeking legal recourse when violations arise. So Legacy has to incorporate strong financial planning into our operations as well. That helps support any legal action when it's necessary, but it also helps to ensure that photo monitor volunteers like yourselves have the equipment that you need when you're out in the field to carry out the monitoring. So these last three bullets are stuff that you as a photo monitoring volunteer will help us with at Legacy. So you will help us implement a program of regular, systematic, and well-documented monitoring that incorporates good record keeping. But really, more than any of these other bullets, the most important thing is maintaining a good relationship with the property owner. That really helps us nip any issues in the bud. So even if it's a successor landowner, making sure that we have a good relationship ensures that they aren't worried about coming to us with any questions or asking what they can or cannot do on their property, and making sure that they understand that we are there as a resource and not there to interfere with how they're using their land. So, why do we monitor? We monitor to develop and maintain relationships with landowners, which, as I just said, is really one of the most important things we can do to ensure the conservation values are being upheld. Monitoring helps us discover changes in ownerships or ways that the land is being used. So we might go out and talk to a landowner and they can mention that they're thinking about selling the property, which is really important for us to know so that we can inform the next landowner of the terms of the easement. So all of that really serves to ensure that the conservation values are being protected, helps us to uncover any violations or misuse of the land by establishing a record in case of any future defense needs. But as an accredited land conservancy, one of the first in Michigan, we are legally obligated to monitor properties once a year. Okay, so who does the monitoring for these conservation easements? Basically, pretty much anybody that's trained to do so can help us monitor properties. So any staff, any board members, any volunteers that have been trained can monitor conservation easements. One of the only exceptions to that is that landowners cannot monitor their own easement property. Okay, so now I just want to do a quick overview of all the major steps involved in monitoring Legacy's conservation easements. So first, in the first few months of each year, Legacy sends a letter out to each of our landowners that have conservation easements, notifying them that their property will be monitored during one of the 12 months in the year. And then as photo monitor volunteers, you'll be on teams and sign up for properties, or you will be assigned properties before the season begins. And as part of that, you will be provided the contact information for the landowners of the properties that you will be monitoring ahead of time. And then 1 or 2 weeks out from that window that was identified in the letter to the landowner, somebody on the monitoring team will get in touch with the landowner to arrange a more specific date for the site visit. This is also a great time to ask a few other questions. There's some on the monitoring form that you will see, but it's also helpful to ask where to park and potentially identify a rain date if you know that that's a possibility. So once you've identified a date, you're going to want to prepare for that visit by reviewing all the documentation in the property binder, which you will have to pick up at the Legacy Land Conservancy office. So that will include the baseline document that we compare all our monitoring visits back to, as well as the easement itself and directions to the property. And once you have done all that, you will go out and do the monitoring visit. And once you've done that, you're going to want to make sure that all the forms have been completed, that you've got all the photos you need, and everything has been filled out and uploaded to the online landscape database. And if you identified any violations or any potential issues, we will follow up on those with the landowners. And if we need to, we may reach out to you just for more clarification on those issues. Okay, so now I'll talk a little bit more about how to prepare for a site visit in more detail. So you're going to want to divide the duties up amongst your team members, however you want. But somebody is going to want to review the materials included in the monitoring binder. So that includes the conservation easement itself, as well as the baseline documentation. And the baseline documentation is basically what we refer back to. We can compare the monitoring visits. So what you're doing, we compare the pictures you take there back to the baseline documentation, and that helps us see any changes. And if you have any questions about what is in the baseline or in the easement itself, any questions about the property, just let me or somebody else at Legacy know. So then you're going to want to get in touch with the other members of your team to coordinate the site visit and divvy up the duties. So if you need to pick up an iPad from Legacy, you'll need to pick up a property binder, figure out who's going to do that. It's helpful to figure out what route you're going to take when you're on the property, who's going to get in touch with the landowner, and that sort of thing. So then whoever is getting in touch with the landowner will give them a call to arrange a site visit, identify a good date for that. It's also helpful to ask where to park. Oftentimes the lands that you're going to be on are where people are actively living or working. Don't want to block them in, so it's always important to ask where to park. And we also offer the landowner the opportunity to walk with you on the visit, and they sometimes take you up on that, which is fun. And then any communications you have with the property owner or representative on the property, you're going to want to make note of that in the monitoring notes form in the landscape app. And yeah. So this is available on our volunteer resources page on our website, but this just is a checklist that will help you go through before, during, after to make sure that you've hit every step you need to as part of the site visit. Okay, so I also want to just go over a few general safety tips for when you're out monitoring. First, dress appropriately. Most of the properties that you'll be responsible for monitoring don't have well-established trails or any trails at all for that matter. So you may be required to do a little bit of bushwhacking or walking around through an agricultural field. So pants and long sleeves are always a pretty good idea, even when it's hot out in the summer, just to prevent your arms and legs from getting cut up by briars or branches or the leaves on a cornstalk. And it's always a good idea to look in the property binder to try to get an idea of typical conditions on the site you'll be monitoring before you go out, and kind of take into account weather. A lot of the properties that you may have to monitor have areas that either stay wet or can hold water really well after a rain, so it might be necessary to wear waterproof shoes, good hiking boots, or muck boots to prevent your feet from getting soaked. And ticks love the land we protect at least as much as we do. I think it's mid-April right now as I record this, and ticks are already out. They're going to be out for pretty much the rest of the season until it starts freezing again. So I strongly recommend tucking your pants into your socks to prevent them getting into your shoes or anything like that. Definitely check yourselves for ticks after you're done monitoring. But when you're out in the field, I mean, you're out in nature, conditions can vary. There's other stuff out there, so just be mindful of pests and wildlife that are out there. You may encounter stuff like the Massasauga rattlesnake, or just even some of the more common stuff. Just stay mindful of what's around you, keep your eyes up, and don't get your head buried in the iPad. It's also important to remember that the risks can change season to season. So while you don't have to worry too much about hunters right now, in the fall, it's always a very good idea to go out with Blaze Orange on. We have vests in the Legacy office that I always wear when I go out in the fall. We try to arrange site visits with the landowners to make sure that there's nobody out hunting then. But if you hear any shots or anything while you're out there, just get out of there and give me a call. And then lastly, just you don't need to go out if the weather is bad. If you schedule a site visit for a day and it starts thunderstorming or anything like that, it's not necessary to get it done that day. You can always go out and finish it another time. We don't want you to put yourself at risk. Okay, so now once you're out in the field and ready to monitor, basically what you're going to do is just walk the property and hit all the photo points that have been identified in the baseline, and you'll be able to see that in the landscape app as well. But you're just going to go out there and document the current conditions of the property, essentially. So you'll hit each of these photo points and try to match them to what you see in the baseline documentation report. So try to match the direction that the photo's taken in and the way that it's framed as best you can, and that allows us at Legacy to look at the photos year to year and see any changes on the land or the way that it's being used. It's important to remember that each of these monitoring visits is private and confidential, so this is just these easements are legal agreements that Legacy has with these private landowners. These aren't public preserves, so don't share any information from your visit with other landowners or anybody else. All right, this is the monitoring notes form. You shouldn't need to print this out. It is available on our volunteer resources page, but all of these questions, all of these blanks that you'll be filling out are in the landscape mobile application, so they can be filled out in there, and that's what we prefer. It just makes it easier on us, but this is essentially what we use to track everything other than the photo points when you're out doing a site visit. And I just want to point out a couple questions that we want you to talk with the landowner about. Have there been any big changes to the property since last year? Do they have anything planned and that sort of thing? Yeah, so if there's anything out of the ordinary or you want to make any notes about your visit, just stick them in here. All right, so other than just hitting the photo points, what are you looking for when you're out on a site visit? Well, as far as issues go, we just want you to keep an eye out for any disturbances in the soil. So if it's being moved around by a front loader or being removed from one location and transferred to another, definitely document that. If it seems like somebody's trying to grow a garden in an area that used to be a prairie or was a prairie on the baseline, definitely document that and make us aware of it. Any trash you see, any piles of garden waste, any grass trimmings, anything like that piled up is typically not allowed. So make us aware of that, take some pictures. But we're going to go through some pictures now and just kind of talk through some of the potential violations or issues you might encounter when you're out on a site visit. This is an example of yard waste in a natural areas easement. So it looks like somebody dumped some branches, brush, maybe Christmas trees. That's not a proper way to dispose of that, so just snap a picture, make any notes while you're out in the field, and we will follow up on that. It's also a good practice to take pictures of any trees that are marked with spray paint like this when you're out in the field. Oftentimes it can be totally innocuous. Some folks use these sort of markings to track deer trails or to mark property boundaries, but sometimes this means that somebody is marking trees for harvest, and that is something that is rarely allowed for on Legacy's conservation easements, so definitely always take a picture of those. Any garbage we're going to want to document. And if you do see a possible violation, you're going to want to notify Legacy staff as soon as you can. So document that in the monitoring report, take photos. But the most important part of this for you to remember as a photo monitor is to stay on good terms with the landowner. So if the landowner is out there walking with you or you see them when you get back, you can ask what happened here or why is this like this? And the landowner might be able to identify the cause. So if it was a bunch of trees that were down, they might say, well, those blew down last week during the big storm. And sometimes that's allowed, but just write down what they say, pass that along to us, take as many pictures as you can, determine the cause, and we will follow up on it. And if any trees are being cut, anything is actively happening on the property that may be a potential concern, call us immediately. This is definitely a rare thing, but it has happened in the past, so just want to make you aware of that possibility. So a few things that are not part of the volunteer's job, and I don't think you would want them to be. Don't do any easement interpretation for the landowner when you're out doing the site visit. Leave that up to Legacy staff. Even when I'm out in the field, I don't do any easement interpretation. The language between conservation easements for different properties varies so much. It's really something that we have to handle on a case-by-case basis. So just don't do any of that while you're out in the field. Don't if they say, well, I'm thinking about planting something here or building something here, don't give them any approval or disapproval. Just make a note of that and pass it along to us, or tell them that you will pass that question along to us. Definitely don't accuse the landowner of violating the terms of their easement. Like I said, staying on good terms with the landowner is really probably the most important job you have as a photo monitor, other than documenting the conditions of the property. So we at Legacy on staff will take care of any potential violations. Okay, and this is definitely a rare occurrence, but if you come across something on a property that you know definitely shouldn't be there, or you don't feel comfortable while you're out doing the visit, just trust your gut and leave. So if a dog is following you around while you're monitoring, or a landowner or a neighbor is looking at you funny while you're walking the boundary of the property, just get out of there. We don't want you to get hurt. Your safety is our biggest priority. So once you're out of there, give me a call as soon as you can, or somebody else at Legacy, and we will take care of that. Okay, so then once you have completed the visit and have made sure that the monitoring form has been completely filled out, that you've asked the landowner all the questions on there, you've made any notes on photos that are necessary, you're going to want to make sure that that is synced and uploaded to the landscape database online. You want to do that as soon as you can. The longer you wait, the more likely it is that some of the details of your site visit will just kind of slip out of your brain. So do that as soon as you can. Definitely keep all your observations on the visit as factual as possible. These are legal documents, stuff that we just use to document the current conditions of the property. So strictly observational and objective. Once all that's done, make sure your data is uploaded and synced, like I said. And then if you have an iPad from Legacy, drop that back off, drop the property binder back off. And then I will review the monitoring visit. And if I have any questions for you, I will follow up on those. And if you identified any potential violations or potential issues, I will follow up on those with the landowner. Okay, so that's pretty much everything on land trusts and conservation easements, photo monitoring generally. So if you have any questions on that, feel free to get in touch with me, send me an email, give me a call, and we will get into how to use the Landscape Mobile application. But before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about invasive species, because it's something that you are almost certainly going to encounter when you're out monitoring. For those of you that don't know, invasive species are those that aren't native to the region and negatively impact other plants or negatively impact local economy, local ecosystems. A good example of an invasive species that you will encounter a lot out in the field is garlic mustard, which you can see to the left. It's very common in the area, and it's an allelopathic plant, which means that it releases chemicals and compounds from its roots that kind of stifle nearby vegetation to help the garlic mustard outcompete it. And garlic mustard is especially insidious because it can produce up to 8,000 seeds, and those can remain viable in the seed bank for up to 10 years. And what makes the situation even more difficult is that the seeds are smaller than a grain of rice, so that can be easily transported on your pants or on your shoes if you have any mud in your boots. And it's just one of many invasive species that can spread really easily and have a pretty negative impact on properties and on land quickly after its introduction. Invasives can usually spread pretty rapidly. So in order to prevent the spread of invasive species on legacy easement properties, as well as other preserves and natural spaces in southeast Michigan, it's always a good practice to brush your boots before site visits and after site visits, and that will prevent you from transporting seeds from one site to another, or if you just got back from a big vacation in Hawaii, you won't be transplanting any really crazy seeds from up on a volcano to rural Michigan. If you have any questions about invasive species generally, Dr. Shika Singh is our coordinator for our local SISMA. So if you have any questions about invasive species, she is a great person to ask. And in order to help mitigate the spread of invasive species, we do have boot brushes available for all our photo monitors. So you can pick one of those up at the legacy office, but that just allows you to brush off your pant legs, scrape out any mud between the grooves in your boots, and prevent the spread of invasive species. We also have sunscreen, bug spray, orange vests when you're out in the fall, available at the legacy office. So before I get too deep in the weeds on how to do photo monitoring with the landscape app, we obviously want you to hit all the photo points, but if you see an area that's especially beautiful, or you get a really good selfie with you or you and your partner, we would love to see that. So you can send any good pics of yourself or your photo monitoring partner to photos@legacylandconservancy.org.